Hey church, good morning. Happy Wednesday to you. Pastor Matthew here again, continuing our series on the book of Ruth. You'll remember that Ruth is a book about suffering, and it's a book for anyone who's trying to reconcile the goodness of God with the brokenness of this world. Last time we took a look at the character of Boaz, and we saw that Boaz was an incredibly generous man. He went above and beyond what God required to care for Ruth, who was poor. Ruth has showed us God's hesed love, and Boaz has showed us God's hesed love. Remember, his hesed love is his never stopping, never giving up, unbreaking, always and forever love. And Ruth has shown it by being willing to lose everything, and Boaz has shown it by being willing to give everything. I want to continue to look at Boaz as we end chapter 2 and just ask this question: do you know who Boaz's mom was? Well, Boaz's mom was a woman named Rahab, and if you're familiar with the story of the Old Testament, you know that Rahab was a prostitute in the city of Jericho, which was not a city of Israelites. And when Israel conquered that city, Rahab made the decision to become an Israelite and join Israel. And so she, like Ruth, was a foreigner in God's people. In other words, there may not have been any man who understood more what it was like to be a foreign woman in Israel than Boaz. We can imagine that Boaz heard stories from his mom growing up about what it was like to be a foreigner in Israel, what it was like to be a vulnerable woman living in that community in that time. And so we can imagine that that shaped Boaz's heart and his imagination. It shaped him to be the kind of man who looked at Ruth and was quick to show her compassion. He might have thought to himself, hey, this is someone just like my mom. This is someone who's not an Israelite ethnically, but has chosen to be part of God's people. And so we see in that another aspect of suffering. God uses suffering to shape our hearts. He uses it to shape us with compassion for other people. We see that compassion in Boaz. He's well off financially, it seems, but we can assume that that's not always been true of his family. That's probably not always been true of Rahab. And so it doesn't surprise us at all then that he's someone who's filled with compassion towards her. God uses these things to shape and form our hearts. We can pray to him that he would use whatever suffering we're going through during this time to shape our hearts as well, that we would come out of this crisis with greater compassion and greater love. We would be quicker to care for those who are vulnerable than we were before. And of course, Boaz, as I've been talking about moralism many times, doesn't do this out of a sense of moralism, but because he understands God's love, his love for foreigners. He saw that in his mom. He sees that in Ruth. And of course, we see that in an even greater way because we were foreigners to God. We were alienated from him. And yet because of Jesus and what he did on the cross, we can now not be alienated from him, but close to him. We can have fellowship with him. And so God brings foreigners close. We're told that Jesus is now our brother. Hebrews chapter 2, verse 11 says Jesus calls us brothers. And we know that Jesus set us free from the slavery of sin. And so just as Boaz knows about God's goodness and his love, has compassion towards foreigners, we also know about God's goodness towards us, his goodness towards us who are far away from him, but he's brought close through Jesus. And so we also can have hearts that are shaped with compassion, not out of a sense of moralism or being good people, but people who understand how much we've been loved, and so we show that love to others as well. Thanks so much, and I look forward to seeing you all again very soon.